Hello, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Chris Kapreski. I'm an undergraduate at Emory University, and I work with Dr. Shilpa Krishna's research team. So our team focuses on patient-centered outcomes research methods, comparing effectiveness of rehabilitation and functional outcomes following stroke across various settings, management of caregiver burden following neurological conditions, and the prevention and early detection of secondary complications following stroke. So Dr. Christian's lab has partnered with Roger's amazing group here, and we are now involved with the Young and Restless meetings every month. I'd like to now introduce our guest speaker, Timothy Harrison, Associate Director of CBCT at the Center of Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics at Emory University, oversees the center's CBCT, Cognitively Based Compassion Training programs, including the Teacher Certification Program and the implementation of CBCT for research purposes. As a senior instructor, Tim has taught CBCT in many contexts, including to numerous teachers and staff in the Atlanta Public Schools through the Department of Education-funded CREATE program to support new teacher residents. He has also taught CBCT widely in healthcare settings to clinicians at the Cleveland Clinic and the Cambridge Health Alliance, and to nurses through the Emory Nursing Professional Development Center, to students at the Emory School of Medicine, and chaplains in Emory's hospitals. He's instructed CBCT for teens in foster care, incarcerated individuals, to college students, and HIV-positive patients. Tim has consulted on a number of peer-reviewed published research projects with special populations, including veterans with PTSD, breast cancer survivors, and parents of autistic children. He has a professional degree in architecture from Harvard University and practice design, as well as different styles of meditation for 2 decades before training in CBCT and joining the Compassion Center at Emory in 2013. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this off to Tim.
Thank you, Chris. That's more than enough about me. It's great to be here with you all and see you again. And good to see you, Roger, Kelly. I can't remember when we met last, if it was before COVID or not. I was trying to, but still, it feels like I can't quite keep track of time myself with the pandemic going on. But as Chris said, I'm at Emory University, and I'm with a center where we study compassion, basically. So it's interesting to me to hear that you've had other speakers come and talk about finances and physical health and probably all sorts of really interesting topics. And not one of you probably ever thought, gee, I wonder when we'll get to hear about compassion. It's just not something you think of as something you would study. But actually, there's a science of compassion now. And there's an incredible body of research going around compassion. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit tonight about what compassion is and why it's so interesting to study and to consider. And then we'll talk about why a meditative or contemplative type of program would be helpful for us to train in our compassion. Not only our capacity to care for others, but our capacity to receive care and enjoy the fruits of compassion as human beings. And again, I'll talk more about why that's so important as human beings. And hopefully we'll have time to try a little bit of a practice. I have some slides to show. Sometimes that's interesting, sometimes it's not that interesting. Before I go into slideshow mode, I do have some slides I'd like to show you, but let me just ask you all what you think of when you think of this thing, compassion. What comes to mind when you hear that word? To what compassion is and what it grows from. Taking others' perspectives, being aware of the, you may not know everything about the other person, so there's a kind of curiosity that sometimes comes when you say, what's going on? What else? And why we have a program that's actually called compassion training. So that's the main thing I do is work with this program called Cognitively Based Compassion Training. And one of our primary clients is actually the Emory School of Medicine. We've been teaching this for 7 years to students there, faculty and staff. We also teach it to all of the hospital chaplains who are in residence in Emory's 12 hospitals. So you might have met some of these folks. But you would think to yourself, well, gosh, chaplains, they're already compassionate, or aren't we all sort of either compassionate or not compassionate anyway? Is it really something that can be trained? But it turns out compassion is one of the things that's most, it's the result of certain conditions in your life. It's whether you can feel compassion and act compassionately. So, and again, I'll talk more about that in a moment. When you think about training compassion, and kindness is a great, almost a synonym for compassion. It's really what we're talking about. If you think about it, we're all pretty naturally kind to some people some of the time. Does that make sense? We all know what it is. That, it may not even be a person who has pets. Anyone have a pet? Only one of you. Well, but for you, it might be your pet that comes to mind. What do you think about someone you feel this kindness for or toward? Who comes to mind? Where and it's not like this is the perfect person, but someone where when you see them, and they may not even be with us anymore. So it could be someone you knew when you were young, but you naturally have that sense of closeness and you have a concern for their well-being. It seems like sometimes some people more naturally have that capacity. But what I'm here to let you know is that there's pretty good evidence everyone has the capacity. Everyone, it's like a seed that as a human being, we are born with the seed of compassion inside of us. So why does training needed? Why would you need to train in it if it's so natural? Because it's a natural human capacity. And one of the reasons is it's even though it's natural, it gets limited. I think about my oldest child, who we spoiled rotten because he was our only child. This made him feel like he was kind of the center of the universe, I think. And so he didn't maybe take other people's needs into his account as much, at least when he was younger. He's a wonderful young man now. But so we have these conditions that maybe start to put blinders on for us about who we feel compassion toward. And the real challenge of training compassion is extending that circle, that in-group, if you will, beyond the people or pets who we already feel a sense of care and belonging with. Because we all have someone, or a few people, or a group of people. But where we run into trouble, if you think about it from a systems level in our society, the way society works, when people draw that hard line between my group, my people, my family, and those other people, that line, when we draw that, is a line that demarcates who we feel compassion toward, right? It excludes people. So what is, well, let me show you some slides to kind of illustrate this. What seems quite wonderful is that we can expand that circle over time. We can take actions, do practices that help us expand it. And at first you think, well, why would I want to help all those other people? It's hard enough to help my friends and family. Well, it turns out that even if you don't wind up helping all those other people, because the truth is we are all human beings with limitations. We're not going to go around solving everyone's problems in the world. No one can do that. We've got enough problems of our own, perhaps. But even just opening our hearts, if you will, and our minds to the perspectives of others, allowing that empathic understanding of their situation, the first person who benefits from that is me. It's the person who has those feelings of feeling connected, feeling that sense of belonging. Because the more people we feel that we belong to, the more people we feel connected to, the more supported we feel, the more uh, nurtured we feel, the more settled we feel. And feeling settled, feeling nurtured, it turns out is really what we all want. I mean, is there anyone here who wants to feel anxious, wants to feel, not that we don't all feel that sometimes, of course we do, but as human beings, one of our greatest hopes is to feel more settled, feel calm, feel soothed. So we'll actually do a practice in a minute that relates compassion to feeling nurtured, but let me show you some slides here. So that's the little title slide. Here's what I was going to talk about. Here's our definition of compassion at our center: a warm-hearted concern for others, together with the desire to alleviate their difficulties or distress. So this is, I think Annie used the word genuine. We might sometimes want to help other people because we get something out of it, right? And that's okay for what it is. But real compassion comes because we have this warm-hearted concern for the other. So that's what we're talking about. It's a genuine, again, we all feel this naturally in some cases for some people. We know what it feels like to receive this compassion from others. Does that make sense? We have memories of people who see us with warm-heartedness, who want to help us. They may not know how to help, so they may have limitations, but still how wonderful it feels when we know that they would like to help, that they want to help, right? So that's what compassion is. And as Franz de Waal, he's a primatologist at Emory who says he's spent more time with monkeys in his life than he has with human beings. He's written so many incredible books about chimpanzees and bonobos. But he says this: in both animals and humans, empathy is biased. It's always stronger for the in-group than the out-group, stronger for one's own family than for non-relatives. So notice it's stronger, but that doesn't mean we can't extend that empathy to be inclusive of others. This slide is just meant to remind us that this, without compassion, none of us would be here, right? Human beings are born on this planet and they need so much care, more than any other animal. We need years of care, feeding, cleaning. And if you've been a parent or around parents, you know how exhausting that can be. So without compassion, that motivation to help, to care, none of us would make it past a few weeks of our life. So, of course, we're not the only species that has this. All mammals have this capacity to care for their young. And sometimes we think, well, that's all they care about. Like a gorilla only cares about her own family members. But that's not actually the case. With gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, they wind up actually making friends across different family groups, just like humans do. So they can be from a completely different tribe, and they actually the young teen boys will often go join another tribe or come or welcome others into their tribe. So this ability to expand the tribe, to be more and more inclusive, is something we see even in chimpanzees and bonobos. This is just a fun slide. You can Google, images of species making friends across species, just to remind us, chimps can be very violent and aggressive. It's true. And in a normal situation, they would fight off a leopard, or they would eat, a bird. But if they're raised in such a way that they're not feeling threatened, they're not feeling like they're missing, that they need food, if their needs are taken care of, it's just natural that they would make friends with these other species because they're not in competition. They're not the environment allows this to happen. So there's a lot of evidence that this kindness, this kindness is actually our basic way of relating with each other. And I know you're thinking, well, Tim, don't you watch the news? Haven't you seen the way people treat each other? And what I would say is, well, there's a reason that those things are on the news. It's because they're so shocking. That's right. Isn't that true? We can't believe people are acting that way, that they're not taking each other's needs into account. Um, most of us, 7 billion of us on this planet, don't make the news every day. We're not out doing violent things to each other. So I just think that really helps me to keep that in mind when I've watched too much news and I'm getting too depressed about the world. It's like, this is not the typical way people are. So I can't believe I have my golden rule slide all queued up. It's not just the science that tells us we're compassionate and that there's a benefit to expanding our circle. Every major religion that's ever, proved to be a foundation of society. There have been so many societies that have come and gone and that are still with us. Has this, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This empathic understanding of others is at the core of what religions teach. And they don't say just, treat those you love nicely and beat up everyone else. They all have in them some kind of encouragement to, as what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow human beings. That is the entire law. The rest is commentary. Blessed is the person who prefers others before self. It's not, anyway, enough said about that. So I'm going to pause for a minute. The science is telling us, and this program that I'm involved with is telling us, is that the compassion that we're capable of, we're born with, it's like learning to speak a language. The human mind and tongue are born with this capacity to make all these incredible sounds and speak a language. We all speak, there's many different languages, but we speak languages like no other species can speak. Now think about that. When you're born, can you speak a language? Not at all. You hold a little baby, you're like this nothing. It can't understand a word. But the capacity is there. And what they're discovering is the same with compassion. Practice it. How do you get better at a language? Did you just suddenly take a pill and you could speak a language? No, you tried it over and over. You were encouraged by it. So unfortunately, there are many parts of our society that do not encourage compassion, that do not help us train our natural ability to care for others, to be kind. But that doesn't mean it's ever too late. Okay, so let me share a little bit about the training program. This is Dr. Negi at Emory. Lobsang Tenzin Negi. He's actually from northern India. He grew up in a Tibetan cultural setting. And he came to Emory as a monk, actually, a Buddhist monk. He was in a monastery with the Dalai Lama for 27 years. And when he got here, people said, "It's so interesting, this theory of compassion that you guys talk about in your monasteries. Would you stay here and teach some?" He wound up getting his PhD in studying Western concepts of emotions. He put that together with the ancient meditation techniques that he had learned as a young person and came up with this cognitively based compassion training program. It's not part of Buddhism. It doesn't reference Buddhism, but it's designed to work with any belief system across faith. So really fascinating in that way, and he collaborated with scientists at Emory to make sure that this was something that everyone could try and everyone could do. Actually, interesting. He did this because one of his students was experiencing mental health difficulties and was distressed that her peers all seemed to be anxious and or having suicidal thoughts. And this was around 2004. And she was in one of his classes. And she said, you're teaching about all these ancient techniques. We're just studying about them. But what if we could do them? Is it possible they could help us? And through that conversation, she just kept encouraging him. He said, well, I can try to create some meditations that anyone can do. Let's try that. And that's where CBCT was born. That young woman is now an Episcopal priest. Interesting. So there's this Lojong is this ancient practice in Tibet called, it translates as mind training. And the basic goal is to make yourself as compassionate as you can be. And again, and this is so important. Sometimes we think compassion is about putting ourselves aside, like throwing ourselves under the mat or under the bus and just taking care of everyone else and not taking care of ourselves. But it's really important to see that there's another way to think of compassion, which is that it's good for other people, but it's also good for me. It's good for me when I'm feeling kindness, when I'm feeling connection, when I'm feeling love. And this is really interesting. I can actually feel that toward myself. And that's just as important as feeling it for others. So we talk in our program a lot about self-compassion, and hopefully I'll have a minute or two to talk to you about that tonight. Is compassion the same as mindfulness? That's not the way Dr. Nagy thinks of it. He thinks of mindfulness as a technique that would help us to cultivate our compassion. So that's the way this is taught. We do have some mindfulness practices. Have you tried mindfulness, Anna?
Yes.
So I have some slides here I'm going to skip through, about the scientific understanding of how compassion can lower our stress in our body. And this led to a really interesting study that showed that actually our cortisol levels in the blood, as well as interleukin-6, IL-6, which is a measure of inflammation, these chemicals in our blood, which indicate stress and inflammation, actually can go down in response to doing these compassion and mindfulness training practices. So again, for sake of time, I'm going to skip through the technical parts of this. It's kind of fun to hear about how they tested people and stressed them out a little bit to see how they would respond. But I really want to get to this because I think this could be really helpful. Elaine Miller-Karras developed this model of well-being or resilience that I think is just a fantastic way of understanding ourselves, and especially our emotional selves or our psychological selves. You think about, we're all taking our temperature so much now with COVID around. This magic number, 98.6. The body wants to stay at 98.6. And what happens if it gets too hot? That's a sign that something's wrong, right? That something needs to be done. We got to re-regulate, come back down. What happens if it gets too cold? Same thing. So what Elaine Miller-Karras with the Trauma Resource Institute said is, well, this is really how our whole nervous system works, if you think about it. We have a sympathetic nervous system that revs us up, gets us energized. Let's say we wake up in the morning and we're kind of feeling low, and then we get some coffee and our nervous system cranks up and we're feeling more energetic. And then later we slow back down and then we speed back up like that. It doesn't mean we're not feeling all sorts of emotions. We can feel a low level of happiness or a high level of happiness. But we're still in this, what she calls a zone of well-being, a zone of resilience. That's where we want to be. That's like our 98.6 temperature. We like to be in that range, within a degree of that, right? And yet, things happen in our life that are like triggers or activating points. You know, if you've ever almost had a car accident and your blood just starts pumping and you kind of tense up and hopefully you steer the car away and avoid that accident. Still, in that moment, there's this kind of dysregulation of the nervous system. It freaks us out. We spike up and then maybe we might drop down low. And then this, unfortunately, some days are worse than others. There might be a second thing that happens. We lose our keys or we get a nasty email from someone. And then there could be a third thing that happens. This could be across a day, it could be across a lifetime. Um, I know I'm talking to people who are familiar with stressful events. You've been there. You know what this feels like. And the problem is not just the event itself, but it's also how the body reacts to it. It's how stressful we feel. So if you get stuck in this high zone, for example, what words come to mind to describe someone who gets stuck on that super sympathetic nervous system revved up state? High zone, we have these words to describe it. You named most of them already. Very good. Manic, rage, angry. And the thing is about getting stuck, it's not a problem to go out of the zone. The body needs to do that. Like I said, you want to slam the brakes on and kind of freak out if they almost have a car accident. You need these surges and you need the recovery. But it's when we get stuck there that it's not such a good thing. And you can probably imagine why. What we're talking about here is really the emotional part of that. It's just one of the aspects, but it's an important one. I don't know, sometimes our body just can't stay at that high zone and we drop down and we're stuck in the low zone. Have any of you ever been there or seen other people there? And what words would you use to describe getting stuck at the low zone, at this low energy? It is true that once you're in the zone of well-being, once you get back in that zone where you're not feeling too edgy and irritable, you're not feeling too depressed or numb, you're kind of even keeled, which is, by the way, has two great advantages. One, it feels good. You're not going to look at any of those words in the high zone or the low zone and think, that's how I want to feel. You don't want to feel fatigued, exhausted, panicked, manic. So it feels good to be in the zone of well-being. But the other thing is that's where we can learn new information. We can take a bigger, see the bigger picture. We can take into account other people's needs and feelings. We can have more empathy, right? But if you've ever been around a toddler who is throwing a fit because they just, you have to take that toy away or it's bedtime and they're just lying on the floor kicking and screaming, that's not really the time to teach them a new lesson about. It's not the time to say, well, if you get a really good night's sleep, you'll feel a lot better tomorrow. They're not going to hear that because they're stuck in the high zone or stuck in the low zone. So while on the one hand, I agree with that idea that a good attitude, I wouldn't say it's the same as resilience, but it can certainly support resilience. But if someone is in that high zone or in the low zone, or we find ourselves there, then we need something different than a good attitude. We need a hug, or we need a good night's sleep, or we need, to go for a run or something to help our body get back. Because this is our body we're talking about, not our mind. This is our body that wants to be calm and alert, right? It's body and mind. But so the first steps in our program are, let's get dramatic. What is meditation? We have this, when we talk about meditation, we're talking about our ability to cultivate certain qualities like compassion, like empathy, or familiarize ourselves with the workings of our own mind. So the first meditation that we do is actually about noticing signs that we are, where are we in this zone? Like you could check with yourself right now as an example, as a kind of mini meditation. It's like, where am I right now? Am I somewhere here toward the middle, which we might call like around a 5, or am I toward the high end, which would be like a 10, or down toward the low end, which would be like a 0? And I'm assuming none of us are stuck in the high or low zone, but you might be, and you're hiding it really well. Actually, it's hard to know if someone's stuck in the low zone. If someone's depressed, no, that can be something that's difficult to notice about someone. So we can't make any assumptions. But let me just say that the meditation practice is not trying to fix this right away, but actually just beginning to notice, where am I right now? Because by noticing, it gives us a chance to do something about it. If we don't, this is where we have this spark to forest fire analogy. Is quite dramatic, but if someone was there when lightning struck this tree, and they could have just put a little bucket of water on it, that spark would never have grown to be this forest fire. That's so difficult to put out. Now it will go out. All fires go out. All of our emotions eventually, we do come back to a state of regulation eventually. But if we can notice earlier on in this process where the sparks are, it gives us a chance to take action, do something about it. Does that make sense to you all? Anyone willing to share like what they notice right now? Actually, the question is really interesting. How do we know we're feeling a little angry? Where do we feel that in our body? Is it in our throat, or chest, or stomach clenching? How do we know we're stressed? Is it tightness in the shoulders? So I'm actually kind of secretly leading you through a meditation right now for you to just check with yourself. Where do I feel either calm or sad or numb? And maybe there's even a numbness. The last thing we want to do is blame ourselves if we find ourselves unable to stay in the zone of well-being, because we're not all going to get to do that all the time. But over time, with some practice, you do start noticing, this type of thought, this to-do list, or this thing that I can't quite resolve. If my mind just keeps repeating that over and over, that's going to really probably get me worked up. By the end of the day, that's going to be pretty distressing. So a meditation practice can do many things, and I would love to talk about all of them, but let's just talk about one for now. When we notice our mind wandering to something that's distressing, or we notice our body is becoming agitated or numb, depressed, giving us these signals of being really low energy or overly stressed, worked up. What can we do? One thing we can do is bring our attention to something that's very neutral. So it doesn't have either a positive or a negative connotation to it, a negative sense. And so an example of this for many of us is just the feeling of our feet touching the ground or touching our shoes. So notice you don't have to move or get into a special posture to do this. You can just check, what do my feet feel like? What do my toes feel like right now? Do I feel, for some people, it feels good to feel that sense of pressure in the chair, like this supportive chair against my back, against my bottom. And you just guide the mind to focus simply just for about 30 seconds on feelings in the body that are fairly neutral and also grounding. Where is the body touching the earth, touching the chair? So for some people, it's nice to notice the sounds in the room. They can be, if they're neutral. If your kids are fighting next door, then this won't be so relaxing. But if you are in a quiet place and you just listen, what do you hear? So is there a hum of the computer or air conditioning, heating system? Any sounds coming from outside the room, you notice? And for some people, just noticing the feelings of the breath in the nostrils can be very settling. If that's a neutral feeling for you, then just notice the tingling sensation as you breathe in. You're not changing the breath now, you're just letting the breath normally do what it always does. And for about 20 seconds, just you could count the breaths actually. Just count how many breaths you have. Let's try that. And if the mind wanders to something else, that's very normal, natural. And what we see if we can do is just say, oh, kind of chuckle, oh, there goes my mind wandering. And then let me gently bring it back to these feelings of my breath, or the sounds in the room, or the feelings of the body being grounded, settling against the chair or the floor. So just pick one of these places in the body to notice that you like, and do that for another few breaths. And then I'm going to ask you to check in again with your zone of well-being. Where are you? Where do you find yourself now? Having done those simple practices with the mind, those meditations. It takes a little effort, but to build these into the day. And again, I think the first step is just starting to notice more. Oh, if we need some stress. The truth is, stress is very important for being a human being. Without stress, we don't get anything done, actually. So we need some. It's just that when it gets to that level of kind of excessive stress, that it starts working against us. So the last thing I'll mention is a practice that maybe I could come back sometime and talk more about this, but I really do want to share. I see that I'm using up my time, but I really want to share this first practice of CBCT, the official first practice we call resting in a moment of nurturance. And the way it works is we remember a time in our life when we have received care or support from someone in a way that felt very genuine, very loving. And for some people, it's very hard to think of a time like that. And so we have alternatives to, like, thinking about a place in nature that feels very supportive and comforting. An experience in your faith tradition, a time where you felt the power of the divine presence or some figure that is meaningful to you like that. And the meditation practice, again, the one we just did was trying to put the attention on something neutral, and that the mind could just kind of give the body a chance to reset. But in this one, we're actually trying to bring attention to something that's very positive, very heartwarming. I've already heard some examples here tonight. Someone who has a favorite pet, or a compassionate child or parent. Maybe the parent's no longer with us, but this is not trying to ignore that reality, but it is saying that there are parts of that, those thoughts of my parents. Many of us have parents who weren't the perfect parents either. That's certainly my case. But I can remember times of experiencing this care, this love, just those moments. Again, not the perfect person, but that moment sitting in someone's lap or having to put their arm around me or just listen when I'm telling them something emotional. And the practice is to just how strongly can we remember that moment? How firmly can we put our mind there? And it's honest, it's like the opposite of worry. Sometimes our minds are really good at imagining something that could go wrong. It hasn't gone wrong yet, right? But we're still thinking about if that goes wrong. And we can imagine it so well that we actually start feeling the stress of that thing going wrong, even though it hasn't even happened yet. So this is harnessing the same capacity the mind has to recall something that's quite soothing, quite nurturing. And that's the thing about compassion that we don't realize. It's like a superpower of sorts. When we can remember that sense of care, nurturance, even if it's just imagined, it gives us so much more capacity to stay settled and calm and to face the troubles of the day, to face the struggles that life has. So this isn't about escaping so that we never have to face reality. It's about giving us a safe place to be anchored and to remember that our capacity to receive care and then also our capacity to give it. We start to realize, what if my life could contribute to others feeling this way? What if my actions, even small ones, could contribute to a world in which other people feel more safe, more secure, more nurtured? That's only a benefit. So this is the first part of the compassion training program. And I'm really happy you invited me here to share it with you. Thank you.